Well, welcome to Culture Couch Live. I've got Murph, Misso and Carly. How are you?
Hey, Rosie. Hey, guys.
David,
How are we all
Carly.
going?
Good.
Now, how's homeschooling? How's homeschooling, Carly? You're the one that's most affected. So kids are running around screaming and...
Yeah, it's not good. It's not easy.
What sort of a teacher are you, Carly? Are you, as opposed to a facilitator of culture programs?
Yes.
How do you rate yourself as a teacher of young children?
Well, it's about what I'm expected to be doing, Murph. So am I expected to be actually reiterating all of the points the teacher's making and help them actually do it? Or am I just meant to be making sure that they're listening?
Are you maths or English? What's your preference in teaching?
Probably maths.
Maths, okay.
Yeah.
Probably not a bad Culture Couch Live to get a teacher on, because, gee, they've done an incredible job, haven't they? I mean, talk about an underpaid and underappreciated vocation. I think we all have so much respect for teachers. So a bit of a shout out to all the teachers and parents out there that are, particularly with younger kids, that attention span's not that great. I know this probably isn't our topic for today, Rosie, but it is an interesting point you're making. My wife's the second. Yeah. As is David's, I think. And one of your pet hates in Zoom meetings is people having their cameras on. And, you know, Liz reckons it's very difficult for kids to put their cameras on. And, and so as a result of that, you all of a sudden you've just lost engagement for a number of people.
Totally.
100%.
And also the mental health issues that are coming out of the lockdown for kids.
Yeah, social connection. Even the sport, Murph, you know, we'll talk a bit about that sport. But yeah, kids just want to be outside. Kids want to be playing. Kids want to be learning, interacting.
They ask them to complete a wellbeing survey every morning. So every morning they say how they're feeling for the day. So whether they're happy, excited, angry, sad. And then they use that in the sessions, and they talk about why you're worried and what are you worried about. And it's a bit frightening, really. But
pretty hard to help though, isn't it, when you're online? Like, it's good to ask the question, I understand that, but how do you really help that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think if they see a pattern over a few days, then maybe they get in touch.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe we can get a teacher on later on and have a really good conversation, because it's certainly topical and doesn't look like it's going away soon. But I want to touch on, I think it's the Edelman Trust Barometer, Misso, that I think comes out once a year, and we were talking about that going on the Culture Couch Live. So do you want to give the listeners a little bit of a barometer about the barometer? There you go. There's a nice little term.
It's a yearly research study that essentially measures the trust of the main institutions in society. So government, media, NGOs, and corporates. And what's been shown this year is a really big drop in people's trust around their leaders, their political leaders. And one really telling stat is, you know, they plot each of those institutions on a quadrant, on a competency and ethics quadrant. And government is the only institution that is seen as both incompetent and unethical across every single country in the world. Which is quite telling when you're expecting the opposite during a pandemic, I would think.
I mean, that's from. Go on, sorry.
I was going to ask a question there, Rosie. So if you were the head coach of Australia, i.g. the Prime Minister, how would you manage it? If we draw out a leadership team sort of analogy, where would you start? What would you do?
Yeah, well, let's stay out of the technicality about the pandemic and vaccines and doctors and deaths and all that sort of stuff, because we're not equipped to delve into that. So let's make that pretty clear from the start. But if you're using a sporting analogy, I guess, Misso, and why...
This is more of a leadership analogy too, Reece.
Yes, sporting and leadership. I mean, to me, the first thing you do is work out who is your team. And surely our team is Australia. That's the number one thing. So if I'm Scott Morrison, you have to bring all your coaches in together. And that's the first thing you have to do. And identify, are we a team? Are we one team being Australia? And I think what's happened here is completely the opposite. We're seeing backs, forwards, midfield, et cetera, just broken down. So the first thing I would do, Miss Murph, is get everyone in together and say, we have to attack this thing together. The second thing that I would do is take a pay cut. And I think the reason I say that, and you need connection with people who are about to lose. Some are losing all of their income. The majority of people are losing some of their income. So you have to show a great deal of empathy, authenticity, and say, as a leader, I understand. If you look at, again, using AFL as an analogy, Gil McLachlan took a pay cut, all the coaches took a pay cut, all the players took a pay cut. And I'd be staggered that if you're talking in Australia, I don't know, would there be 90% of people that have lost some form of income? So as the leader of the country, you have to symbolically show that we are in this together. So Murph, that's probably, does that sort of answer your question? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I like the analogy of getting everyone on the same page, because I think you're right. You know, Victoria versus WA versus New South versus Queensland versus Tas versus the SA versus NT versus ACT, I suppose. You're right. If the backs aren't on the same page as the forwards, then there's no connection. Then all of a sudden, the game plan starts to break down. And so I think getting everyone on the same page is absolutely vital. It's pretty hard though when everyone's got conflicting interests. So I don't know, Miso or Carly, how do we manage that? Because like they're big issues, aren't they? Like it's education versus the elderly. You know,
I think there's some things, Murph, that require bipartisanship though, you know, and if you have a look through Australia's history, our federal leader has been able to achieve that, you know, through world wars, through the Depression, and I would think a once in a century pandemic would be a requirement to, as you say, Ruzi, to bring everyone into the same tent and to forget about political leanings and what party you're from, and to have a bipartisan approach to getting this country back on its feet. And we've almost done the exact opposite.
And I'll ask you, Carly, because it is, isn't it, not only as the Prime Minister or the head coach, we can talk about it, but also we need the premiers to park their egos, you know, and that certainly has not happened. So it's become, and to your point, Misso, about the trust, it has become more political than it has become everyone coming together and working collectively. That's probably the most frightening thing for me.
Yeah, but I think the other thing too is we want them to own the job and own the task at hand and tell us the truth about what they're doing. So okay, so maybe we don't have enough vaccinations to get everyone done by a certain time, but I think a lot of the conversation we're having particularly is around, well, what's the plan? Tell me what the plan is. Like, you know, and like, you know, to bring it back to your sporting analogy, are we all running to this spot? Are we all running to that spot? Like, what's our overarching plan that we're trying to achieve? And I think particularly for me, a lot of the frustration is at the moment is that we could be going into more lockdowns over the next 6 months because no one's telling us what we're aiming for and how we're potentially going to get out of it. And that's, I think, the difficult part is, you know, own it, tell us what's happening and give us a path forward.
Yeah,
I was going to say, it's a great point, Carly, because, Ruzi, imagine going into the season without a clear game plan.
Yeah. Or if we were to guess the game plan, this is even more catastrophic for me. If we're able to guess the game plan right now, it's 0 cases. Now, that to me is like saying we're going to go in and win every game by 22 goals. You know, it's just an unachievable plan. And we don't even know whether really that is the plan. But I suppose what we're guessing is we're shutting things down to try and get it to 0. So it seems like the plan is unachievable, which then in turn sucks the hope out of everyone that I'm sure is now sitting here, to your point, Carly, going, well, if we're not sure what our plan is, but let's say the plan is 0 cases, where are we heading? You know, again, you're talking about the trust of the government. And Murph, you articulate this really well, that the trust bank, and maybe for the people that haven't heard us talk about that, getting back to the Edelman survey, what that analogy that you use, just run by that again.
Yeah, so in essence, trust is like a bank account. So you make deposits when you deliver on your word or when you do good things, and you make withdrawals when you don't. So if you make a mistake, then people can handle it if you are able to say, put your hand up and say, hey, I made a mistake. Can we talk about this? And I will now rebuild the life of faith that you now have in me. And again, the deposit withdrawal things, if you make a big withdrawal and you don't have much in your trust bank, well, then you're in trouble. If you deliver over and above what people expect, and I suspect there's been governments do that around the world, like the UK government handled it terribly at the beginning, but they over-delivered on the rollout of the vaccination. So they actually won a lot of trust back. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens now that they've gone into Freedom Day and so against medical advice. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to their trust bank now. But in essence, that's how it works, Ruzi. You make a deposit, you make a withdrawal. And
I think what we've all seen as well is one of the first things to create trust is if you have made a mistake, to put your hand up and say you have. And we just haven't seen that. So that automatically makes people suspicious. Well, if it's so obvious that we haven't got enough vaccines or we haven't got enough of a variety because AstraZeneca seems to be on the nose, which, is an argument in itself. If you can't even admit that, then what else are you not admitting? And what else are you not?
But now they're trying to hedge their bets. Now they're trying to say, okay, well, let's have lockdown for another week, because even though we only need 3 days, let's tell you a week, because if we tell you 3 days and then we make it more, then we have to go back on our word. So it's almost like a chicken and an egg scenario, isn't it, when you're trying to hedge your bets all the time?
Well, I think the interesting thing too, Carly, is you can't be neutral in terms of trust. You can't do nothing and say nothing and build trust as well. So trust is an action, isn't it? It's actually a positive action to build trust, or a negative action. So you can't be just a neutral observer and try and build trust. I think that was fascinating as well.
Because all great leaders have to have an opinion and have to make really hard decisions. That's what makes them great leaders. So you're not always going to get it right. And that's what makes you learn, and that's what makes you get better. But you've got to make a call and you've got to make some hard decisions, even if you know people aren't going to like it. And I think that concept is also really interesting about leadership too, because what this survey is saying is that as individuals or as employees, we trust our business leaders to do that. We trust them to make hard decisions. We trust them to be honest with us, but we don't trust our politicians to do the same thing. And that concept is really quite interesting.
Yeah, and overall, it's pretty damning, isn't it? I mean, it's pretty damning when we've got something like this happening, because, and we talk about it all the time too, don't we? You can't just build trust like that under pressure. Suddenly a pandemic turns up and we're just going to build trust within, because your trust blank, clearly, Murph, the trust blank is depleted by the government going into the pandemic. So it becomes really difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think putting some of those concepts together, you've got to have a really clear plan. People have to know their roles within it. You have to work together as a team. You have to be prepared to admit when you're wrong.
You have to have real conversations, man.
Yep, yeah, 100%. And you have to be honest in your language. But if you spin it round, it provides an enormous opportunity both for the corporate leaders to take advantage of it, if you like, or for political leaders to say, no, enough's enough. Like let's actually stop, reassess where we're at, and actually move forward in a more meaningful way. Because at some point, you hope at some point someone is going to do that, and it'll be really fantastic to watch, because it's so devoid at the moment. And you look overseas, and there seems to be other people doing it better. So
I think we're absolutely waiting for that. We're waiting for a leader to stop and put their hand up, stop hiding behind epidemiologists and taking safe options by talking about public health advice and saying, well, we're going to stop sacrificing the health and well-being of our young people, and we're going to sort of get on with, living as a normal society again.
I think the other thing too is, if we finish on a positive, businesses are really starting to understand it, aren't they? The corporate world, if we finish on the positive note, the corporate world is really starting to understand the concept of trust. So maybe just each make a comment about that to wrap it up.
Because they're listening, and one of the really prominent behaviours of a good leader and a good team is that they really listen to each other. And so corporations are listening to their customers, they're listening to their employees, and that's what they're telling them. And that's why they're starting to behave in that trustworthy manner. And I think that's a really big factor for them being successful.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it's leaders are prepared to say, well, I'm not the smartest person in the room. I can't make all the right decisions. I need people around me, and I need to trust and respect these people. And instead of just handing over decision-making situations, I'm actually going to actively develop my team and build a culture where people aren't scared to put their hand up and make suggestions and potentially be wrong sometimes.
Murph, you must have seen enormous change in the corporate world over your 20-odd years in the space in terms of the trust level.
Yeah, 100%. But I think just picking up Carly's point, there's a consequence to poor behaviour in the corporate sector.
Yeah.
So if you don't treat your customers well, if you don't treat your team well, then there will be consequences in terms of sales or in terms of staff turnover or engagement. And probably that's the thing that we're missing at the minute. There doesn't seem to be much consequence for political leaders not doing the right thing. Like it just goes on and on. So I think for me, there's an element of what is the consequence if you don't do the right thing actually has an impact on how you behave. But it's going to be an interesting few weeks ahead, I think.
What's your final?
Right, guys, good conversation. Just what was that again, in case people want to look that up? So the Edelman
Edelman Trust Barometer. Yeah, you can probably go onto Edelman's website.
Yeah. It's certainly an interesting study, a lot of great information. So hopefully we've put that into some sort of context around trust, which was what we talk about a lot. So guys, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week on the Culture Couch Live.